All right, well, it's an argument we've heard time and again over these past 4 years. It echoed through the halls of Congress by Republicans when President Obama was first sworn into office, and it was once again reverberated on the 2012 campaign trail. President Obama is an enemy to business. He's a socialist by nature and by practice. That combative rhetoric was brought up once again this week when the CEO of Whole Foods, John Mackey, described the president's new health care law as downright fascist. Here's a few other examples of business leaders taking shots at the president.
Every business guy I know in the country is frightened of Barack Obama and the way he thinks.
He wants redistribution of wealth, and he's a socialist at heart.
We have people running the show who seem to really not have the slightest idea how the world works, frankly.
But here's the thing. According to an analysis by Bloomberg News, corporate profits are the highest they've been under any president since World War II. Take a look. After-tax profits are up 171%. The S&P 500 index has gone up 80% since the president took office. And a couple examples of how these corporations are doing now. Caterpillar Inc. profits have grown 32% since last year, and Yahoo profits are up 67%. Now, whether these profits are because of the president's policies or in spite of them, that lies in the eyes of the beholder. So was all of this Obama bashing overblown? Or is there something more to the data? For more, RT producer Justine Underhill is here in D.C., and Anthony Randazzo, Director of Economic Policy at the Reason Foundation, is in our New York studios. Welcome to you both. Anthony, I'd like to start with you. We've heard a lot of criticism of President Obama, but if these numbers prove anything, he's not the worst socialist in history, right?
Well, it all depends on how you define socialism. I think even the president has said that he's in favor of redistribution of wealth, and that's a good thing. So it's all about like the language that's used, whether or not it's positive or negative, gets thrown around for some political reasons. But I would say, in answer to your question there at the top, are these business results the result of the president's policies, or in spite of them? I think that they are a result of the president's policies. The Bush administration and the Obama administration bailed out large corporate financial institutions, and the Federal Reserve has spent the past 4 years with its quantitative easing program, providing cheap loans to large financial institutions. These two things combined have allowed for corporations to make a lot of money. And that's not being realized on Main Street because all that money more or less just sits with those organizations. They're not investing it. They've got productivity up while unemployment stays down. So I would say it's because of the president's policies, but not necessarily in the ways that he may want it to be. And
Justine, I want to get your take. We have heard different corporate CEOs say that it is in spite of President Obama's efforts that they are experiencing these 171% profits. What is your take about these statistics and how President Obama stacks up against them, considering the stimulus and quantitative easing?
Right. So corporate profits after taxes are at about $1.7 trillion as of 2002. And before the financial crisis, they were at about $1.3 trillion after taxes. So even with the financial crisis in between, corporations are doing just fine. I would definitely say that the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing has had an effect, but it's also important to consider things like unemployment and low wages as also another factor to consider as to why corporations are doing so well.
And we've also heard other things, other kind of reasons why this higher profits is happening. One of the things that people are attributing to this, Anthony, maybe I can pose this question to you, is that only 1/3 of the Dodd-Frank Act requirements are being imposed. Tell me what type of a role that plays into it.
Well, if you're going to look at the results of regulations directly affecting businesses, we haven't seen that much of Dodd-Frank actually be implemented, and a lot of the final rules that even have been announced, some of them like the Basel accounting requirements for banks, aren't going to be fully implemented until 2019. So in some sense, there are certain regulations that there's concern are being offered about, that the fears are for the future. The environment of there's going to be a lot of regulations. There's a lot of smaller regulations, state-level regulations, and fears about tax code. That's the rhetoric that business leaders are largely focusing on, and where I do think that today's data is not sort of reflecting the reality on the ground is that, sure, you've got a lot of profits at these large corporations, but what we haven't been seeing is investment in the economy, and that's the reason why the economy is weak. That's the reason why unemployment is still a significant problem, is that you can make a lot of money, you can borrow money from the Fed for basically free, and then you can loan it back to the government and make a 3% profit on the free money that you got in the first place, and you can rack up a lot of profits, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a strong economy. Without actual investment in the economy itself, we're not going to see economic growth.
So, Justine, let's talk about this, piggybacking off of what Anthony is saying. One of President Obama's approaches to fix the economy was kind of this trickle-down economics. So we're seeing this huge growth in profits on the part of corporations. Is it trickling down? And if it's not, why not?
So you mentioned Caterpillar had record profits, and what wasn't mentioned is that Caterpillar also instituted wage freezes for a lot of its blue-collar workers. So even though they're making record profits, it doesn't necessarily trickle down. Now, there are expectations that there might be more hiring in the future, so that still has yet to play out. We don't know what this will look like, and so it might be a positive thing in the future, but we still have yet to see it play out. That's if companies don't hold on to their money as reserves. That means that they need to be investing in the economy and hiring more workers.
And you brought up you brought up the points of the future and how unemployment can affect profits in the future. Another thing that could really affect it is the new healthcare laws. A lot of people are saying that these taxes are going to play in effect. Do you think that they will play as big of effect to slowing down profits?
Well, as of now, so corporate taxes for Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act, those don't come into effect until 2014. So right now, when you see corporations complaining about it, it hasn't taken effect yet. What would be more of a concern is if there are more debt ceiling debates or more uncertainty in Congress. That I would see as being a bigger factor than healthcare.
I think the important thing to look at, if you're a small business guy, middle business guy, or even a large corporation, and you're going to see a large tax hit your books in the next couple of years, when you're looking at expanding your business or investing, you are looking down the road. So while on the one sense, I think that there's been a lot of businesses that have been complaining about the president from a political perspective. They're conservatives and they're just going to complain about the president no matter what. It doesn't delegitimize the fears of businesses looking at increased regulatory costs or tax costs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and that limiting their investment decisions today. And I think the other thing that's important to pay attention to here is when you see industry groups like the Chamber of Commerce saying the regulatory environment is hitting the economy, look at small business and look at entrepreneurship. Over the last two presidents, Clinton and Bush, we saw about 11 jobs per 1,000 workers created by new businesses every year. And that number dropped to about 7.8 workers per 1,000 per year under the past 4 years. Now, that's not necessarily all the president. The economy has a lot to do with that. But we've seen slumping entrepreneurship at the small business level. That's a huge problem in the economy, and that is the regulatory environment is a huge reason why we're not seeing more small businesses trying to compete with the big guys.
That's an interesting point, Anthony. And I do want to bring up another point and kind of segue this conversation a little bit. Corporate profits might be up, but Americans are equally dissatisfied with Congress and with corporations. There's a new Gallup poll that was put out that says 64% of Americans are dissatisfied with Congress, and only 65% were dissatisfied with corporations. Now, obviously, Republicans and Democrats had different opinions about this, but have the government and corporations practically become synonymous in many Americans' minds? Anthony, I'll direct that question to you. We'll go ahead and get Justine's opinion. Looks like we're having a little bit of issues. Are they synonymous?
Sure. So there's been a huge amount of dissatisfaction of the American public with both Congress and the financial services industry. And I think part of that is because you've seen a huge revolving door in Washington between Wall Street, the big banks, and politics. And you have huge interests, lobbying interests, where basically a lot of lobbyists write the bills for Washington. So there isn't much difference between the two, and I think that's something that's been reflected, especially as people become dissatisfied with both.
And let's go ahead and talk about the dissatisfaction of Congress. We just had 94 new Congress members sworn in with the 113th Congress, and you know, despite them running on platforms of being just like the average American, the median net worth of each one of these incoming freshmen is about $1,066,000. So that's $1 million more than the average person. Anthony, we've got you back, so let's talk about this. Can Congress say that they're going to correct our economic problems, considering that they're just so woefully disconnected from them?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think one thing that we just have to realize is that the people who run for public office are usually those that have disposable income, that have a higher amount of wealth. I mean, you can't run for Congress or the Senate if you have to work a 40-hour-a-day job or 40-hour-a-week job. If you have to work a 40-hour-a-day job, you got a problem. But if the types of people that wind up running for Congress usually are those with higher net wealth. So I think that inherently those are the people who are going to be in Congress. I think, though, that the American people are probably a little bit more concerned with whether or not the individuals in Washington can reduce the amount of money that they spend from taxpayer pockets, as opposed to just how much those congressmen have made in their previous lives.
An interesting conversation, and one that's sure to continue. Justine Underhill, RT producer, and Anthony Randazzo, director of the economic research at the Reason Foundation. Thank you for your opinions.
Thank you.
Thank you.